What happens when an empire controls more gold than its enemies can even imagine, yet still falls in silence? The dust still clung to my boots when I first saw the ruins of Gao, a city that once ruled over kings, now crumbling into the earth like it was never there at all. They say the Songhai Empire was the largest ever in West Africa, stretching across deserts, forests, and rivers. But why do so few remember its name? Who was the warrior king who rode storms into cities and conquered scholars with steel? Why did the people of Timbuktu bury their books beneath the sand? And how did an army of thousands fall to a handful of soldiers carrying strange smoky weapons? What secrets lie inside the manuscripts still locked away in mud brick libraries? Why did a devout ruler end his life in exile, betrayed by his own blood? And how did the empire's greatest strength, its rivers, its trade, its systems, become the very things that unraveled it? In this journey, we uncover what the dust still holds, not just ruins and relics, but echoes, clues, truths that were never lost, only hidden. This is the story of Songhai, and if you listen closely, it is still speaking. The heat shimmered over the Sahel like a memory. Long ridges of sand, dry grass, and scattered acacia trees stretched out under a sky that felt too wide for one lifetime to cross. I had walked for hours under that quiet sun, where the air pressed down like a secret too long kept. Then, I saw it. The low mounds, the broken outlines, a silence that was not empty, but filled with the weight of what once stood there. I had found Gao. Here, the Songhai story does not begin with an empire, nor with a king. It begins with trade winds and whispers. Long before the world knew its name, Gao sat along the Niger River, watching the slow rise of human ambition. The city was born of the water. It drank from the river, it grew beside it, and it listened to what the current carried: salt, gold, leather, ivory, but also voices, languages foreign and familiar mixing under that fierce blue sky. I ran my fingers through the earth and felt the grit of something ancient: clay, burned brick, charcoal remnants from fires that once lit merchant quarters. I could see them in my mind. The early traders who lived not by conquest, but by negotiation. Who mapped the world not with borders, but with stories and routes. Gao was one of the first great trade cities of West Africa. Long before Timbuktu became the dream of poets and kings, Gao was already pulsing with life. And yet this place is almost silent in modern history. It is not where the tourists go, it is not etched into textbooks. But when you stand there, the stillness hums with forgotten energy. The foundations of homes still rest beneath the soil. Fragments of pottery, etched with simple lines, still catch the afternoon light. These were not just relics, they were clues. Archaeologists have found remnants of a mosque here, older than most in the region. That tells us something, not just about religion, but about connection. Gao was a gateway. Through it came scholars, merchants, mystics, and somewhere along that road came royalty. By the 9th century, Gao had become more than a trading post. It had kings, a ruling class, diplomacy, order. Some records from Arab geographers speak of it as a city of wealth and power. They wrote of horses and fine bridles, of kings who held court beneath canopies of gold thread. Whether these were exaggerations or glimpses of truth, we may never know. But one thing is certain. Gao was not waiting to be discovered. It was building its own future. I found traces of that ambition in the metal. Forged iron tools, weapons, ornaments, not crude or primitive, but elegant, refined. The Songhai were learning to master both war and beauty. and Gao was the forge. But every rise begins in shadows. Gao's early rulers are barely remembered, their names lost, their lineage broken by time. Only the earth remembers, and in that soil, the Songhai identity slowly emerged, not all at once, not as a kingdom written in stone, but as a people learning to shape the world around them. As I stood among the ruins, the wind shifted. A warm breeze swept down from the north, stirring dust and memory alike. I imagined the sound of hooves along ancient roads, the laughter of children, the call of prayer rising over mud brick walls. This was not just the beginning of an empire. This was the first heartbeat. Gao was the echo, before the voice, and now, centuries later, I had come to listen. I stepped onto the narrow wooden boat just as the sun began to rise. The water was still, reflecting the pale gold of morning. Around me, the Niger River stretched wide and calm like a long breath held by the earth itself. It moved not with force, but with purpose, as if it had somewhere to be, and always had. They call it the Great River, but to the Songhai, it was more than that. It was the beginning and the end of all things. It carved the shape of their world. It watered their fields, carried their goods, and whispered their stories far beyond the horizon. From here, it flows in a strange curve across West Africa, a rare inland river bending like a question mark through the Sahel. Along its path, cities bloomed. Gao, Timbuktu, Djenne. Without the river, there would have been no empire. Not here, not like this. I let my hand skim the surface. The water was warm, familiar, full of life. Fishermen still cast their nets as they did centuries ago, singing songs that carry across the quiet. Their canoes are carved in the same way, their movements unchanged. Watching them, I felt time dissolve. The Songhai understood this river as a partner. They built their fields beside it, mastering flood cycles, coaxing grain and millet from the reluctant earth. But they also learned to ride its currents. Long boats once sliced through this water like arrows, laden with goods, salt from the desert, gold from the south, cloth from the north. In the market towns along its banks, languages mingled and fortunes rose with the tide. Trade did not simply follow the river. Trade was the river. It was the artery that carried not only goods, but ideas. With every shipment came knowledge of new gods, new medicines, new ways to chart the stars. The Songhai became rich not by hoarding, but by flowing. In one abandoned village, I found stone weights used in ancient markets, still smooth to the touch, still balanced. And near them, fragments of ceramics, bowls that had once held spices from lands so distant their names no longer survive. This was not isolation. This was global. This was motion. The river also served as a border, a protector. During times of war, it became a wall. But to those who knew it, to those who belonged to it, it was always a path. Even today, the people who live along its banks speak of the river with reverence, not with fear. They say it remembers. One elder I met told me a story passed down through generations, that the river has a voice, that at night, if you are quiet enough, it will speak to you of the past, of empires and kings, of betrayal and love, of cities swallowed by sand but never forgotten. I stayed up that night by the water's edge, listening. And I swear, in the lull between wind and insect, I heard something. Not a voice exactly, but a rhythm, a pulse, like a drumbeat beneath the current. The Songhai rose because the river gave them life, but it also gave them reach. Control the river, and you control the roads of a continent. And yet, they never truly owned it. No one could. The Niger is not a servant. It is a spirit, the kind that endures. As I watched it disappear into the trees, I knew I would follow it, not just with maps, but with memory. Because the river did not just feed an empire, it was the empire. His name reached me long before the ruins did. Spoken low by villagers, carved faintly into stones left behind, and echoed in songs passed down through generations. Sunni Ali. The name moves like thunder across the plains of West Africa. Half history, half myth. A man remembered not for who he was, but for what he changed. I followed the stories to a sun-bleached plateau outside Gao. The wind was dry and hot, but the silence was thick with presence. Here, centuries ago, Sunni Ali began his rise, not just as a warrior, but as a force of transformation. The Songhai had existed before him, small, fractured, proud, but vulnerable. He gave them direction. He gave them fear. Born in the early 15th century, Sunni Ali was no ordinary ruler. His leadership did not come with long titles or quiet diplomacy. It came on horseback, wrapped in smoke and steel. He was a general first, a king second. His strategy was relentless, his campaigns brutal. He understood what it meant to take and to hold. One by one, he brought the scattered lands under Songhai control, not with treaties, with sieges. Timbuktu, Djenne, powerful cities, once independent, fell to his armies like dry leaves in fire. He brought them into the fold, not gently, but completely. Timbuktu, the great center of Islamic learning, was not conquered with reverence. It was taken with suspicion. Sunni Ali distrusted the scholars, many of whom had sided with his enemies. He saw knowledge not as a blessing, but as a threat. And so some libraries were spared, others silenced. It was not cruelty for its own sake, it was control. But he was not just a sword, he was also a bridge. Sunni Ali blended the old beliefs of his people with the expanding presence of Islam. He was a Muslim, but he honored the traditions of his ancestors. He visited soothsayers, consulted diviners, wore charms. To some, this made him impure. To others, it made him wise. To all, it made him powerful. I found remnants of his era not in palaces, but in the patterns of conquest, fortifications, roads, places where armies had moved and others had fled. His empire stretched from the deep forests to the edges of the desert. It was the largest West Africa had ever seen. And yet, his reign lasted just over 20 years. 20 years to change the course of history. There are no portraits of Sunni Ali, no statues carved in his likeness, only memory, scattered and conflicted. Some called him a tyrant, others a savior. A few say he drowned in the Niger River under mysterious circumstances. Others believe he was taken by spirits. Even his death is wrapped in fog. But his legacy, that remains clear. Sunni Ali turned Songhai from a regional power into an empire. He did not ask for permission. He did not wait for consensus. He moved, and the world moved with him. As I sat beneath a lone tree outside the ruins of Gao, I thought of the weight of a name, how one life could ripple through time. He left no monuments, only consequence. In the dust, I sketched the curve of the Niger, the shape of his conquests, and the fragile borders of power. Sunni Ali did not build to last, he built to conquer. And in doing so, he gave the Songhai their moment in the sun, a moment that would burn brightly, and cast long shadows. The road to Timbuktu is not marked by signposts. It is written in sand, in wind, and in the memories of those who still speak its name with wonder. I arrived at dusk, when the sun turned the sky the color of dying embers and the shadows of the mud brick walls stretched long across the earth. The silence was not empty. It was sacred. I had reached the city of legend, the city of light, buried in dust. Timbuktu. A name that once meant the edge of the world, the farthest a dream could go. To the Songhai, it was not just a city, it was a crown, a jewel placed carefully in the folds of empire, glittering not with gold, but with thought. I walked through narrow alleys flanked by ancient walls. The scent of old paper lingered in the air, mixed with dust and the faint aroma of spices. These streets once echoed with the footsteps of scholars, poets, and pilgrims, men who came from across the Islamic world, from Cairo, from Fez, from far-off Baghdad, seeking knowledge and sanctuary. Long before printing presses hummed in Europe, scribes here inked books by hand, tens of thousands of manuscripts, astronomy, law, medicine, geometry, philosophy, not just preserved but debated, refined, reinvented. Timbuktu was more than a library, it was a living mind. And yet, its power was not just in parchment, it was in presence. To walk into the city was to enter a conversation centuries old. The great mosque of Djenne stood like a sentinel of time, its earthen towers softened by centuries of wind, but still proud, still watching. Built in the 14th century and kept alive by generations of hands, it was a place of worship and study, a school and a sanctuary. I stood at its door and imagined the prayers once offered here, not just for peace, but for understanding, for guidance, for truth. But truth in Timbuktu was never simple. When Sunni Ali took the city, he saw danger in its freedom of thought. Scholars were imprisoned, some fled, others stayed, keeping their knowledge hidden, waiting for the storm to pass. And it did, for a time. Under Askia Muhammad, Timbuktu bloomed again. He recognized its value. He brought scholars back, supported the mosques, funded the schools. For a moment in history, this city stood at the center of African intellect and Islamic theology. Even today, the sand has not swallowed it entirely. Beneath the surface, manuscripts remain, wrapped in leather, stored in boxes, passed down in secret. Families protect them as one might guard it. In a quiet courtyard, an old man let me hold one. It trembled in my hands, light as breath, fragile as a dream. The words were written in careful Arabic, dark ink faded to sepia. I could not read it, but I could feel it, the weight of centuries in a single page. Timbuktu is often thought of as lost, forgotten, but that is not true. It is hidden, protected, like a gem buried in sand so it will not be broken. The Songhai did not build Timbuktu, but they claimed it, guarded it, and in doing so they placed wisdom at the heart of empire. They understood that power does not only live in swords, it also lives in silence, in thought, in ink. As night fell, I looked back at the city, its silhouette rising gently from the earth as if it had always been part of the landscape, and I understood why they called it the crown jewel, not because it shone, but because it endured. They told me it did not exist. That time had taken it, that the sand had claimed it. But something in me refused to believe that. Great knowledge does not vanish. It hides. It waits. And so I searched, not in museums or archives, but in whispers, in old maps and older memories. And one morning in the shade of a crumbling courtyard, someone took me by the hand and led me into shadow. We passed through a narrow alley where the air grew still and thick with heat. At the end stood a simple wooden door. Behind it, a staircase wound down into the earth. The air was cooler there, the dust finer. At the bottom, in a room no wider than a small shop, I saw them. Manuscripts, stacked in bundles, wrapped in cloth and leather, some tied with twine, others sealed in boxes hand-carved from cedar. The light from the single window lit them gently, as if even the sun understood their fragility. This was the library, not one built with marble columns or gilded shelves, but with reverence, with memory. These were not books for decoration. They were lived with, prayed over, argued from, passed through generations like sacred flame. Pages of astronomy that charted stars with precision. Texts on law and governance, philosophy and ethics. Some were religious treatises, others scientific theories, and many were personal reflections, diaries of scholars who had watched empires rise and fall from within these very walls. I held one in my hands. The leather cover was cracked but strong. The script inside danced with beauty and care, each line drawn with intent. Margins were filled with notes from different hands, different centuries. It was not just a book, it was a conversation across time. These manuscripts were written in Arabic, in Fulani, in Songhai. Some were translations of ancient Greek or Persian works. Others were original thoughts born in Timbuktu, nurtured under the Songhai sky. The scholars here had not simply copied, they had contributed, they had debated, they had created. The Songhai Empire understood the power of such knowledge. Under Askia Muhammad, they protected it, funded it. The great University of Songhai flourished in these years. Students came from across the continent. Some studied for over a decade before they were considered ready to teach. In these halls, knowledge was not a means to power, it was power itself. And yet, the world did not always understand this. When wars came, when foreign powers marched in, the manuscripts were seen as fragile, as targets. So the families of Timbuktu did what they had always done when danger approached. They hid their treasure. In clay jars beneath floorboards, in trunks buried beneath the sand, in secret rooms passed down through blood and trust. And so, the library survived, not in one place, but in many. Scattered, protected, alive. I looked around that hidden room and felt something shift. This was not a relic of the past. It was a defiance of forgetting, a quiet resistance. In a world that often honors the sword and forgets the pen, this place whispered a different kind of truth. The Songhai left behind gold and conquest. But this was something deeper. This was the soul of a civilization. As I climbed back into the daylight, I carried none of the manuscripts with me. They belonged where they were, but I carried their weight, their presence, their echo. Buried beneath the sand is not the past, it is the future, still waiting to be read. The morning air was thick with heat and silence. I stood on a ridge above the Sahel, watching the earth stretch into a golden haze. Beneath my boots, the ground crunched with fine gravel and powdery sand, but mixed within it, glints. Tiny flecks of something brighter. Gold dust. Carried by wind, washed down from hills, and left behind by centuries of caravans. I was standing on the edge of a road that was never paved, yet shaped the fate of empires. This was the trail, a path invisible to modern maps, but known to those who followed stars and dunes. It began far to the south, near the ancient goldfields of Bambouk and Bure. There, Men with picks and baskets pulled wealth from the rivers by hand, rinsing the sediment again and again until only gleaming particles remained. Gold did not flow like water. It moved like a secret, slow, deliberate, precious. From those mines, caravans set out with guarded steps, long lines of camels, feet pressing memory into the dust. Each carried more than metal. They carried power. To follow the gold dust trail was to walk in the footsteps of merchants, warriors, and kings, and at its northern end lay Gao and Timbuktu, and the heart of the Songhai Empire. I found the remnants of one caravan stop, a ring of stones blackened by fire, the charred remains of cooking pots still half buried in the sand. Someone had once rested here, slept under stars, counted gold by torchlight. These were not tales of treasure hunters. These were the arteries of a civilization. The Songhai did not simply discover gold. They organized it, regulated it, taxed it, protected it. From the forests of the south to the salt-laden heart of Tagaza in the north, they wove a web of control. Gold moved in one direction, salt in another, knowledge in every direction. This was not just trade, it was a system, and it worked. In the great markets of Gao, gold dust was measured with precision, not by weight, but by volume. Traders used calibrated gourds and ceramic spoons, each amount agreed upon through centuries of custom. Trust was a currency as vital as gold itself. But gold is a dangerous teacher. It makes cities rise. It makes mouths speak in praise. But it also draws eyes, greedy eyes, foreign eyes. And soon the gold trail was no longer just a Songhai lifeline. It became a map for invasion. Still, the empire thrived. The wealth drawn from this trail funded armies, built mosques, paid scholars, and impressed even distant kings. In Europe, they whispered of an African empire dripping in gold. In North Africa, they envied its control. And in the heart of the Sahel, the Songhai stood proud. I followed the trail as far as I could, through dry riverbeds and windswept plains. Sometimes, I found nothing. Other times, a glint, the faintest flash of something ancient and precious beneath the dust. It was not always gold. Sometimes it was bone. Sometimes a shard of pottery. Proof that this place had been lived in, not just passed through. As the sun set behind the hills, the gold flecks around me caught the fading light. The wind picked up, swirling them into the air. For a moment, it looked like the earth was breathing light. Gold did not make the Songhai, but it revealed them. It showed the world what they could become and what they risked losing. And as the last light faded, I understood. The trail is still here, just beneath the surface, waiting for footsteps and memory. The first time I saw Djenne, it rose out of the earth like something imagined. Its walls were not stone or marble, but sun-baked mud, shaped by centuries of hands and memory. At its center stood the Grand Mosque, a towering vision of faith and clay, its spires reaching into the sky like fingers whispering to the clouds. But it was not the architecture that pulled me here. It was the stories. They say there are magicians in Djenne, not illusionists with tricks or sleight of hand, but men and women who speak with spirits, who heal with herbs and chants, who know the secret names of things. I came to listen, not to judge, not to prove, just to understand. In the market, life moved in rhythm. Spices thick in the air, voices layered like music. But behind the noise, in the shade of narrow alleys, there were whispers. The locals did not speak openly of the magicians. Some called them marabouts, Others used older names, but the tone was always the same, part awe, part fear. I met an old man by the mosque, his hand stained with henna and thyme. He told me the story of a healer who once stopped a plague with a single prayer inscribed on a strip of leather. That strip, he said, was placed in a pot of water, and the village drank from it and lived. I asked if he believed it. He smiled and said belief was not the question. The question was, do you listen when the wind speaks? The Songhai Empire tolerated these magicians. Sometimes it employed them. Sunni Ali himself, fierce and rational on the battlefield, was known to carry charms. He consulted diviners before his campaigns. To him, knowledge was not limited to what could be seen. It included what could be felt. In Djenne, I visited a home where amulets hung from every beam, each one carefully wrapped in leather, inscribed with verses from the Quran or symbols older than Scripture. They were not decoration, they were protection. The family there had passed them down for generations. In a corner sat a manuscript filled with diagrams and incantations. It was part science, part poetry, a map of a world just beneath our own. Some scholars say this was superstition. Others argue it was early medicine, early psychology, the wisdom of survival. But the people of Djenne did not divide their world so cleanly. Here, knowledge was layered. A scholar might memorize scripture by day and consult stars by night. A healer might recite prayers while grinding roots. The lines between seen and unseen were not lines at all. They were threads woven tightly. The empire understood the value of this power. These magicians, these mystics, were not pushed to the margins. They were advisors, interpreters, intercessors between the visible and the invisible. In a land where rain was rare and war frequent, knowing how to speak to the unseen was not a luxury. It was a necessity. As I walked through Djenne's quiet streets at dusk, the call to prayer echoed from the mosque. A warm breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and distant incense. I passed a doorway where a charm hung silently, a tiny scroll tied with a red string. It did not shimmer, it did not glow, but it felt like a boundary, a promise, or a warning. The Magicians of Djenne have no statues. Their names are rarely written, but their legacy moves through the city like a hidden river. You cannot see it, but it shapes everything. In a world ruled by empires and armies, they held a different kind of power. And sometimes, that power was the most enduring of all. The land rolled out before me like a hardened wave, cracked and dry from centuries of sun. I stood near the old frontier, where the empire of Songhai once pressed against something it could not quite swallow. The horizon here feels sharper, as if shaped by resistance. This was the edge of Mossi territory, and here the Songhai met a challenge they could not crush. The Mossi kingdoms were not a single entity. They were a cluster of independent but linked powers, fierce and unyielding. Their capital, Yatengda, and others like it, sat further south, beyond the easy reach of the river routes that had made Songhai strong. The terrain was harder, the people harder still. And when Songhai came with swords and strategies, the Mossi replied with fire. The siege began in the late 15th century, when Sunni Ali sought to extend his empire further south. Songhai armies had already taken Timbuktu and Djenne. Victory had become a habit. The empire grew bold, perhaps too bold. When they marched on Mossi land, they expected submission. They found defiance. From what the chroniclers suggest, the Songhai forces were well armed and numerous. They built camps, prepared siege works, cut supply lines. Standard tactics. But the Mossi were not standard opponents. They did not wait behind walls. They struck with speed and ferocity, using the terrain to their advantage. They knew the paths, they knew the seasons, they knew how to vanish and reappear. I walked through one of the old battlegrounds. The ground was still pitted with what may have once been fortifications. A few iron spearheads were uncovered nearby, corroded and nearly swallowed by the soil. And beside them, bones, human, animal, mixed together, a quiet graveyard without names. The battle was not a single event, but a series of strikes and counterstrikes. And while Songhai forces made gains, they could not hold them. The Mossi did not care for conquest. They cared for survival, and in that, they were relentless. Their archers were feared, their cavalry swift. They fought with the knowledge that defeat would mean not just loss of land, but loss of identity. Eventually, Songhai withdrew. It was not a crushing defeat, but it was a stall, a limit. For the first time, the empire had reached a border it could not redraw. This failure marked a subtle but important moment. It revealed that even empires had edges. Even giants could be stopped. Back in Gao, I found references to the Mossi campaign in fragmented texts, brief, almost reluctant mentions, as if admitting the limits of expansion would weaken the myth. But the soldiers remembered, the merchants remembered, the scars remained. Some say the Mossi continued to raid northern territories after that. Not in conquest, but in retaliation. They remained fiercely independent, resisting the great powers of the Sahel for generations. Their survival was not just military, it was cultural, political, spiritual. I spoke with a griot, a traditional storyteller who still recites the tale of the siege. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. He said, "The Songhai came with thunder, but we were the mountain." That phrase stayed with me. Because empires often believe they are unstoppable. But there is always a mountain, a people who will not bend, a place that does not fall. And when history remembers them, it does so not in pages, but in presence. The Siege of Mossi is not often taught, but it matters. It was the moment the Songhai learned that even their reach had limits. And sometimes, limits are where true stories begin. The mosque in Gao was quiet when I arrived. The early light had just begun to slip through the cracks in the mud brick, catching on dust and worn prayer mats. At its center stood a tall, tapering structure of sun-dried clay, crowned with wooden beams jutting like frozen gestures. It was his tomb. Askia Muhammad, a ruler, a pilgrim, a reformer, and yet even here, where his legacy rests in stone, I felt the weight of his shadows. Askia Muhammad came to power not by inheritance, but by force. After the death of Sunni Ali, his son took the throne. But Askia, then a general, challenged him. The empire was restless, the transition uneasy, and with a decisive battle, Askia claimed control. His name, in Arabic, meant he who leads, and lead he did. But unlike his predecessor, Askia Muhammad did not rely solely on war. He ruled with a different vision, one drawn not from the sword, but from faith. In the year 1496, he undertook the pilgrimage to Mecca. The journey was long, winding across deserts and kingdoms. When he arrived, he stood not just as a man of power, but as a man of belief. He sought recognition from the Caliph of Cairo, and he received it. From that moment, the Songhai Empire was not just African, it was Islamic in full measure. When he returned, he brought with him scholars, judges, architects, and ideas. He established Islamic law throughout the empire, creating a structured legal system based on the Sharia. He expanded the university in Timbuktu. He appointed governors and ministers, not just loyal but educated. He organized the tax system, built roads, and sought to unify the empire under both order and divine purpose. I found records of his reforms in brittle pages tucked away in private libraries. His decrees were written in elegant Arabic script, stamped with seals still visible after 5 centuries. They spoke of justice, of morality, of discipline. This was not the chaos of conquest. It was the calm of design. But even design cast shadows. Askia Muhammad's devotion to Islam was deep and sincere, yet in his effort to unify the empire under religion, he alienated parts of it. Many in the countryside still practiced traditional beliefs. The blending of old and new, once tolerated, became strained. What was once fluid became rigid. And within his own court, ambition did not sleep. Later in life, Askia went blind. Old and vulnerable, he was overthrown by his own son. The man who had brought order to the empire died in exile, removed from the throne he had shaped. His descendants would fight for control. Civil war would fracture the unity he had built. I stood beside his tomb, the dry wind curling around its edges, and I wondered about legacy. Askia Muhammad brought greatness to Songhai. He gave it structure, dignity, purpose. But he also left behind divisions, lines drawn too tightly, ideals that could not bend. And in those cracks, the future would begin to splinter. Still, the people remember him. In Gao, his name is spoken with pride. In Timbuktu, his reforms are honored. And in the silence of that mosque, his presence lingers, not just in stone, but in the questions he left behind. What is power without faith? What is faith without mercy? Can a ruler shape belief, or must belief shape the ruler? As I left the mosque, the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the courtyard. His tomb stood quiet, but his story still speaks. I found the coin in a market stall in modern-day Mali, worn smooth, its edges dulled by centuries of passing hands. Yet the markings were still there, faint Arabic script, the imprint of a ruler's authority. It was not made of gold, it was bronze, common enough. But in that coin lived a deeper truth. The Songhai Empire was not just built on conquest, it was built on systems, on paper, on coin. We often imagine ancient empires as made of swords and stone, but walk through the ruins of Gao or the libraries of Timbuktu, and you will find something different. Ledgers, contracts, treaties, receipts for goods traded, fines paid, taxes collected. The Songhai were not merely warriors, they were administrators. This was an empire that knew how to count, how to weigh, how to record, and in that record-keeping lay its strength. At the height of its power, Songhai controlled a vast network of trade routes. From the gold fields of the south to the salt mines of the Sahara, goods moved with purpose. Alongside them moved scribes. They kept track of weights, prices, and obligations. They wrote in Arabic, on paper made from reeds, using ink blackened from soot and oil. I sat once in a private archive in Timbuktu, its shelves heavy with documents. One was a tax register itemizing contributions from villages near the river. Another listed fines levied for disputes over trade. These were not just bureaucratic notes. They were evidence of trust, of law, of a society that believed in the written word. And then, there were the coins. The Songhai minted their own currency, small, round, stamped with the symbols of state. While much of the economy still ran on barter, gold dust measured by calibrated spoons, cloth, salt, grain, the presence of coin marked something greater, a standard, a center. The Songhai leadership was telling the world that this was not just a kingdom of warriors, it was a civilization of order. Merchants from as far as Morocco, Egypt, and even the Ottoman world came to trade under the rules set by the Songhai state. Their currency was respected, their contracts enforced. And in the great markets of Gao and Timbuktu, law was not an abstract idea. It was a daily presence, written down and upheld. But with structure comes fragility. Systems require memory. They require training. They depend on those who can read and those who can enforce. And as the empire aged, cracks began to form. Corruption crept in. Records were altered. Bribes became more common. The delicate balance between coin and paper began to wobble. In one faded manuscript, I found a letter from a governor to the central court, complaining of missing tax payments and local disputes. His frustration was clear. He was part of a machine that had started to grind. Still, the Songhai legacy in economics and governance is profound. Long before Europe developed complex banking systems, the Sahel had already tasted structured finance. Long before the printing of state paper, they had already trusted the pen. As I held that old coin once more, I thought about its journey. How many hands had passed it? How many markets had it crossed? How many promises had it witnessed? The Songhai Empire ruled with armies, but it endured with ledgers and law, and in that balance, between ink and metal, it found its greatest brilliance, and perhaps its greatest burden. The walls of Gao still hold secrets, not the kind buried in earth or carved in stone, but the kind whispered behind closed doors, carried in glances, sealed in letters never sent. In a quiet corner beneath the ruins of a once grand hall, I found what looked like a storage room, but on the floor, charred fragments of parchment, and beside them, the rusted edge of a ceremonial dagger. Something had happened here, something that left no official record, only residue. It is easy to believe that empires fall from without, that enemies come with fire and steel and topple what once stood tall. But often, the greatest danger lies closer. It grows from ambition, from doubt, from betrayal. The Songhai Empire, vast and brilliant, was no exception. After the reign of Askia Muhammad, the lines of succession blurred. His sons and grandsons fought for control, each believing the throne was theirs by right. They split the court with arguments, with alliances, with blades. One removed the other, and he, in turn, was removed. What had once been a center of power became a stage for family war. I read accounts from travelers who passed through during those years. They spoke of confusion, markets half full, governors unsure of whom to serve, soldiers watching their own backs more than the borders. The empire had grown large, but its heart was fracturing. And it was not only within the royal family. Regional leaders, emboldened by the chaos, began withholding tribute. Merchants whispered of taxes paid twice, once to the empire and once to local powers who now acted as kings. The scribes who once chronicled order began to fall silent. Some turned their ink toward survival, writing not history, but prayers. In one account, found in a crumbling library, a court official wrote that he no longer knew who ruled. He feared speaking aloud, unsure who might be listening. Even loyalty, once a virtue, had become dangerous. There were mutinies among the army. Whole battalions vanished into the desert, taking their weapons and loyalty with them. Others sold their services to the highest bidder. The military, once the spine of the empire, had become brittle. In a town along the river, I spoke to a griot who recited an old verse about the time when brothers became blades and the crown wore a shadow. His voice was steady, but his eyes were tired. He told me that memory is heavier when you carry it for others. And perhaps the most telling sign of the empire's sickness was silence. In the final years before the fall, the flow of official decrees slowed. The archives thinned. It was as if the empire, knowing it was dying, stopped writing, stopped claiming, stopped hoping. Power does not always leave with a roar. Sometimes it drifts, piece by piece, until only the title remains, until kings rule in name, while others move the gears from behind the veil. The Songhai Empire was strong enough to resist enemies from afar, but it was not ready for betrayal from within. And by the time the fires came from the north, the empire was already burning inside. I left that shadowed room in Gao with the scent of ash still lingering in the air. The parchment was gone, the blade was dulled, but the lesson was clear. Empires do not fall in a day. They begin to crack in silence. And sometimes, the enemy does not cross the border. He crosses the threshold. The plain of Tondibi lies quiet now. Dust settles softly over flat earth where no monuments rise, no flags remain. But if you close your eyes and let the wind speak, you can almost hear it. The clash, the screams, the thunder that changed everything. This is where the Songhai Empire met its end. Not through famine, not through civil war, but through gunpowder. In the year 1591, an army crossed the desert from the north. Sent by Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur of Morocco, it marched with a bold purpose. The Moroccan treasury had drained after its campaigns in Europe. The Sultan's gaze turned south to Songhai's gold. The Moroccan force was small, fewer than 5,000 men, but they carried something the Songhai had not yet mastered: firearms, arquebuses, cannons, and trained gunners. Against them, the Songhai fielded a much larger army, tens of thousands strong, brave, loyal, and armed mostly with spears and swords. When I visited the site of the battle, the sun was just rising. The ground seemed unremarkable, but beneath the surface, history lingered. Bones have been found here, musket balls too. They tell a story of impact, of mismatch, of courage that could not withstand the cold mechanics of a new age. The Songhai had fought many battles before, against the Mali Empire, the Tuareg, the Mossi, but this was different. This was not a battle of men. It was a battle of eras, steel against smoke, flesh against fire. The first shots tore through their formations. Horses panicked, lines broke. The Songhai army had never seen anything like it. Their strategies, once effective, were undone in moments. Arquebuses reloaded slowly, but what they lacked in speed, they made up for in fear. The sound alone scattered ranks. The cannon fire shattered morale. By the end of the day, the Songhai forces had retreated in disarray. The field was left to the Moroccans. The heart of the empire lay open. The Moroccans pressed forward, taking Gao, Timbuktu, and other cities. But victory brought its own problems. The desert had drained their strength. The people of Songhai did not welcome them as rulers. Resistance rose in small bands. Governance proved difficult, and the gold they had come for was harder to find than expected. The Songhai state, as it had once existed, did not return. The centralized power collapsed. Regional leaders held on where they could. The libraries of Timbuktu went quiet. Trade routes shifted, and the empire, which had stretched across West Africa, dissolved into memory. I found a letter from a Moroccan commander sent back to Marrakesh months after the conquest. He wrote of heat, hunger, and confusion. He wrote that the land they had taken was harder to rule than to defeat. His words were not triumphant, they were weary. This was the irony. Morocco won the battle, but both sides lost the future. Gunpowder changed the world, and in Tondibi it ended one of Africa's greatest empires. Not through a campaign of brilliance, but through the introduction of something new, something impersonal, a weapon that made honor irrelevant and courage outdated. As I stood over that quiet plain, I thought of the warriors who had charged without knowing they were galloping into history's turning point. I thought of the silence that followed, and I wondered how many empires will fall, not to enemies who are stronger, but to technologies they never saw coming, because sometimes the sword is not defeated in battle, it is outlived. There are no banners left, no royal seals, no golden crowns resting in dusty halls. After the battle at Tondibi, after the thunder of Morocco's guns, the Songhai Empire did not collapse with ceremony. It unraveled, quietly, slowly, like a thread pulled from the edge of a once great tapestry. I walked through the outskirts of Gao, where weeds grow through broken foundations. Once the capital of kings, it now echoes only with footsteps and the wind. A few herders passed by, their livestock grazing near what used to be the heart of an empire. They did not speak of Songhai. They did not need to. The past was buried beneath their feet. The Moroccans tried to govern the conquered land. They set up garrisons, appointed officials, issued commands. But the empire they entered was not the same as the one they had defeated. The core had already fractured. Communication lines were frayed. Trust had vanished. The complex system that had once connected villages to the court, traders to tax offices, scholars to cities, had collapsed. In Timbuktu, the libraries were locked. Some manuscripts were hidden, others lost. The scholars, once welcomed by kings, now faced suspicion. Many left. The institutions that had defined the intellectual soul of Songhai dimmed. The silence that followed was not just political, it was cultural. Out in the provinces, local leaders rose in the vacuum. Some declared themselves kings, others became warlords. The unity that had once tied the Niger River's winding path into a single realm was gone. Villages fortified themselves. Trade slowed. Roads were no longer safe, and the sense of shared identity began to fade. I found remnants of Songhai's final years in a crumbling mosque. In the margins of a legal text, a scribe had scribbled a note. It read, "We do not know who rules now." That line struck me more than any battle record or royal decree. It was the voice of confusion, of a world that once made sense, now scattered. But perhaps the most haunting part of Songhai's fall was not what was destroyed, it was what was forgotten. In European texts, the empire was reduced to a footnote. In colonial accounts, it was described in fragments, often misrepresented, often misunderstood, and among its descendants, the memory dimmed with time, not erased, but dulled, passed down in songs, in family stories, in names, but without the weight it once carried. Empires fall. That is the way of history. But some leave echoes, others vanish beneath dust and silence. I sat with a village elder in a quiet town near the Niger. He told me of a hill nearby where no one builds, where the ground is considered sacred. He said that long ago it was the site of a palace, but no one remembers the king's name, only that he was a great man before the forgetting. Those words stayed with me, before the forgetting, because history is not just about what happened, It is about what we choose to remember, what we carry forward, what we let go. The Songhai Empire ruled for centuries. It produced scholars, warriors, builders, thinkers. It shaped a region and for a time stood as one of the most powerful forces in Africa. And yet, its fall came not only through defeat, it came through neglect, through silence, through forgetting. As I left the old roads behind, I realized that I was not just exploring ruins. I was walking through the absence of memory. There are pages that do not shout. They do not proclaim glory or victory. They whisper, faintly, like wind brushing across stone. I found those pages in the back rooms of Timbuktu and the hidden corners of Djenne, manuscripts left behind by hands that had seen too much and said too little. These were not royal decrees or declarations of empire. They were poems, letters, marginal notes scrawled in the edges of sacred texts, fragments written not for public record, but for the self, for memory, for survival. One manuscript, wrapped in faded leather, held a collection of verses by a scholar whose name was almost erased by time. In the opening line, he wrote, "The stars no longer sit where they should." It was not an observation of astronomy, it was grief. The world he had known was shifting, the empire was breaking, and all he could do was write. Another, in a legal document dated near the end of the 16th century, had a note written sideways along the page. It read, "May those who come after remember what was lost." A simple plea, not for vengeance, not even for justice, just remembrance. As I read those lines, I felt the weight of what manuscripts carry, not just knowledge, but presence, the thoughts of real people, their hopes, their fears, their attempts to understand a world changing too fast for them to hold on to. Some wrote of God, of faith in the face of decline. Others recorded dreams, strange, symbolic, filled with omens. A lion walking through the marketplace, a river that flowed backwards. Visions not meant for literal belief, but for expression, for the release of feeling in a time when feeling had no place in politics or power. What struck me most was the quiet. These manuscripts were not meant to dazzle, they were meant to endure, to sit patiently through the centuries, waiting for someone to open them. And when they are opened, they do not speak loudly, they hum, softly, persistently. I met a curator in Timbuktu, a man who had spent his life collecting and protecting these documents. He told me that every page is a voice, and when we read them, we do not just study history, we listen to. Some of the manuscripts were damaged, pages missing, ink faded, but even in their brokenness they spoke. A half-finished sentence, a name abruptly cut off. These were the echoes of a world not entirely lost, but waiting. Because the truth is, the Songhai Empire may have fallen, but it left behind more than ruins. It left behind a conversation, carried not in stone, but in script. And it is in those echoes that the human side of history reveals itself, not the kings and generals, but the scribes, the teachers, the children learning to write their first verses, the families who buried their manuscripts in jars, hoping one day they would matter again. In one final document, written in the last days of imperial order, a scholar simply asked, "If the ink dries, who will remember the story?" As I placed the manuscript back in its case, I looked around the room. Shelves of voices, stacks of silence, and I knew the answer. We will. As long as we choose to listen, the empire may have been erased from maps, but it still lives in the margins. The river moved slow that morning, quiet and brown under the rising light. I crouched by its edge, letting the water pass through my fingers. This was the Niger, the lifeline, the witness, the memory keeper. It had seen it all, from the first market stalls of Gao to the final retreat at Tondibi. And still it flowed, as if time were nothing but a ripple. All around me the dust stretched wide. It clung to my boots, my hands, even the air. Dust that had once coated palaces, that had drifted across battlefields, that had settled on the spines of forgotten books. But dust is not emptiness. Dust is residue. Dust remembers. In every ruined wall, there is a trace of laughter. In every cracked jar, the memory of trade. In every manuscript, a voice still trying to be heard. The Songhai Empire is no longer drawn on maps. Its kings are no longer named in schoolbooks. But walk this land slowly, and you will find it. You will find it in the rhythm of the fishermen, casting nets the same way their ancestors did. You will find it in the mud mosques, repaired with bare hands each year by those who still believe that earth can hold spirit. You will find it in names, in stories, in songs that carry the weight of history, even when the meaning fades. I met a young boy in a village near the river. He was reciting verses in a small school, his voice soft but clear. Behind him, the teacher pointed to Arabic script written in chalk. It struck me then. The thread had not broken, it had only thinned. The fall of Songhai was not just about conquest, it was about forgetting, about allowing the silence to grow thicker than the stories. And yet, the dust still holds those stories. Not in perfect form, not always in clear lines. But they are there, buried beneath time, waiting for hands willing to uncover them. Sometimes history is not found in monuments. It is found in the way a path curves through a village, in the angle of a wall, in a well that still draws water. The Songhai built more than an empire. They built a world, and that world did not vanish. It adapted. It folded into the fabric of West Africa, subtle but present. I carried a small stone from Gao with me, just a piece of broken pottery, smooth on one side, rough on the other. It had no value, no inscription, but it came from a place where kings once walked, where decisions were made that shaped generations. Holding it, I felt not closure, but connection. Because this journey was never about solving the mystery, it was about listening to it, letting it speak in its own language, the language of erosion and endurance, the language of dust. As I stood to leave, the wind picked up, brushing across the plain, stirring the sand in slow, swirling patterns. I watched as the dust danced in the morning light, not as something lifeless, but alive. The Songhai Empire is gone, but not lost, not entirely. Its stories are not finished. They are simply waiting. Another chapter closed beneath a sky that has seen more than we will ever know. Another trail followed into the heart of time. The Songhai Empire did not end in a single moment. It faded like twilight, slowly, with echoes that still whisper beneath the dust. I have walked through its silence, stood in its ruins, held its memory in brittle pages and broken coins. And through it all, I have come to understand something simple but profound. History does not vanish, it waits. It waits in the stories told at dusk by firelight. It waits in the rhythm of hands rebuilding mud brick walls each season. It waits in the language, the music, the rituals we do not even know we inherited. The Songhai were more than conquerors. They were traders, scholars, poets, visionaries. They created a world guided not only by force, but by learning, by faith, by systems and dreams. And even when that world was struck down by greed, by betrayal, by foreign ambition, it left behind something eternal. It left behind memory, not perfect memory, not always written clearly, but memory that lives in people, in places, in the very shape of the land. If you listen closely enough, you can still hear it. So this is not the end, not really. The dust still holds more. The river still flows. The manuscripts still speak. And I will keep following, one step at a time, one forgotten trail after another. Because out there, in the quiet corners of the world, history is not sleeping, it is watching, waiting for someone to ask the right question, waiting for someone to care enough to hear the answer.